My name is Laura Perry, and I lived as transgender for almost 9 years, and I was just radically set free by Christ and no longer have those feelings and desires. And so I'm passionate about helping others find that same freedom.
I'm Francine Perry. I am the mother of a prodigal, and I would just like for all of you to know that prayer changes things, and as you submit to the Holy Spirit, I believe He will work in your prodigal and you will see a miracle in your life.
My mom and I had a very rough relationship when I was very little. And I think because of, she was so passionate about all her working for God and all, a very legalistic view of Christianity. And so she was always doing a lot of good works and doing a lot for me to show me love. But I had a hard time understanding that because I just wanted her to spend time with me. So that was very early in childhood. But as I got a little bit older, I was sexually abused. I was molested by a boy that was only a year older than me. And it really changed me. I became very sexualized, and I began experimenting with my own friends and trying to push them into sexual acts. And I began fantasizing about being a boy. I became very jealous of boys. Maybe it was a way of escaping or something. I remember when I started having trouble with my female system not working very well, and it was like, see, I should have been a boy. I wasn't supposed to be a girl. I just really started to believe that lie. And as I became a teenager, I became more and more angry at God, and throughout the next 10, 15 years, I struggled to find my identity and really became extremely sexual. I was very promiscuous. I became like a prostitute almost without getting paid for it. I think what was most sad about the whole thing is the way that men began to treat me. I kept thinking, if I give them this that they're wanting, then they'll really love me. But it was the opposite. They treated me like total trash. I had a guy one time tell me I might as well be a hole in the wall because he didn't see me as anything but a sexual object. I thought maybe I can be the man and I can treat a woman like she's supposed to be treated, and I can be the sort of reverse the roles, and I can be everything that I'm wanting in a man. Maybe I just need to be that for myself. But at the time, transgender was really not heard of. It was still a very taboo subject. In fact, I had never even heard the term. I literally typed in Google one night, girl becoming a boy. And so I found a support group meeting and showed up the first night and just told them what was going on. And they told me how wonderful it was. And they said, oh, you're transgender and you need to take these hormones and then you'll have surgery and eventually no one's gonna know the difference and you're gonna be so happy. And one of the very first things I had to do was to go to a therapist. They have to diagnose you, I guess, as transgender or gender dysphoria. She stumbled onto something I really wasn't paying attention to what I was saying because I was just filling the time. I wasn't interested in counseling. I was like, this is a requirement. Eventually I'm gonna get the hormones. That's all I cared about was starting this whole process. And at one point I remember she said, wow, you really have issues with your mom. And I got really angry at her and I sort of blew up at her and I said, I'm not here to talk about my mom. And she said, so you're not interested in counseling? I said, no, I don't have any desire to do this. All I want is the hormones. So she just gave me the letter that I needed to get the hormones from the doctor. And so I started that process and began injecting myself with massive doses of testosterone. My voice began to get lower. I began to grow facial hair, and I thought, wow, this is so amazing. And people are starting to call me Jake now. That was the name I'd gone by.
Laura, even at a very young age, had a severe hormone imbalance. And so when she was a little bit older, it was found she had very high testosterone levels. That's not so unusual. She will say it was, she was very tomboyish. Well, a lot of girls are very tomboyish, and I think a lot of them maybe outgrow that. I can't really speak to a lot of that because I never saw it, and none of us did in the family. I mean, she was always attracted to boys. She had boyfriends and stuff, so I did not really see the issue, what later would crop up when she was like 25 years old. Go back with me to July of 2008. It was on my 40th wedding anniversary. And Paul and I, we had decided to go eat with Laura on our anniversary. When I walked into the restaurant, I noticed she had really butched her hair. And so I didn't think too much about it. But when my husband wasn't at the table, I asked her, I said, Laura, are you trying to look like a man? Tears began streaming down her face. And she said, yes, Mom, I am. I felt an elephant immediately crushing my chest. And I cannot tell you the depth of grief that washed over me that night. I could not believe that this was coming into our life. This didn't happen to people that for kids had been raised in a Christian home, Christian school, and we were down at the church every time the doors were open. I thought we had done so much right, but yet, here we are, the parents of a transgender child who had walked away from the Lord. So I was raised in church. My father was an ordained lay minister, but the Christian life became more to me of, here are the things you do, here are the things you don't do. And if you keep your list, then you are a good Christian. And that's how I assessed spirituality and growth, was by all my activity. So I was down at the church all the time, playing the piano, working in children's church. I was on a lot of committees, going to every conference, just like I thought I should do. And so I was trying to perform on that activity treadmill. And I was like a type A hamster in that treadmill that was going nowhere. So when Laura announced that she was going to be transgender, I went home that night. Paul and I said not one word to each other for an hour drives home. I had enough guilt for all the mothers in the world, because you immediately think, what could I do wrong? What could I have done differently? I remember she called me one day and wanted to know if she could come to church. And I thought, I don't want you here. Because we had told no one except 2 couples that really took us under their wing and nurtured us and sheltered us. No one else knew. And I knew if she came that I would have to start talking about it. And people knew something was wrong. And so somebody just asked me one day, what's the matter? Is Laura pregnant? And I said, oh, I wish that was all it was. God convicted me that Sunday morning. I was playing the piano and I began to scan the balcony. And I thought, oh, good, she's not here. And then my eyes landed on her, because I hadn't seen her much as a boy. And I thought, I think that's Laura. And God slapped me across the face, because I was more concerned about what people were going to think of me than her being there and hearing the sermon that was on the prodigal son. As God began working on me, I was so angry with her at first. But God really began to show me that she was a victim. There's so many, especially in the later days, it says, that are going to become victims of Satan's seducing lies and the doctrines of demons. So as God softened my heart, I saw her as a victim. And it was very clear to me that God said in my heart, only one of us is going to work on her. If you want me to work on her, then you go sit down. And I said, God, I don't understand this, but I believe that if I just come to a place of total submission to you, you will begin to work in me. You've brought something in my life. I can't control it, because in previous days, it was always when there was a problem, I have a plan. I can fix this. Here's step 1. And so I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a step. I prayed a lot of the stuff that was in Andrew Murray's Absolute Surrender and Humility book, trying to learn what true humility really is. And so I began to pray those things for me. And I remember a lot of times, especially with my husband, I would want to have the last word. And so I remember as God was working on me, something had come up at home, and I was about to say something, and I just made an intentional turn, and I thought in my heart, by the power of the Holy Spirit, I'm not going to say that. And the peace that came over me was incredible. And so I've learned that as I submit to Him, He keeps me from saying things that I don't need to say. He keeps, I don't know how to describe it, except that the more I surrender to Him and stay in His Word, the more He has control of me. And I began to see the fruit of the Spirit produced in me. And that's what I'd been trying to do my whole life. Where is it? And then it was like day after day, little by little, He works it into me. And as I began to grow and change, He gave me a peace that I cannot even explain. Even when Laura was in the darkest of the pit, she knew how we felt. We don't need to beat her over the head with it every time we see her. And I knew it would come. I just had to wait.
The night that I had come out to them, it had just completely crushed them. And so for years, we'd had very little contact with each other, except just occasionally. I ended up meeting another transgender that we ended up becoming partners and lovers, and we had an amazing relationship at first, or we always did, but it wasn't as fulfilling as we thought it would be. Because over time, I think that we could see that we weren't truly the other gender. Because he was a male to female transgender, and he sort of mirrored what I couldn't see in myself, I think. But at the time, I just thought, well, maybe he just needs a little more practice. Maybe he just needs more hormones, or, I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something wasn't quite right. When we were going to the support group meetings, we started going very faithfully for the first year, and we were leaving more depressed than when we showed up to the meetings. And we thought, what is going on? These people are supposed to be the happiest people in the world. They're living out what they've always dreamed of, and yet we are leaving these meetings so depressed because all we hear about is how horrible life is for everyone. And I remember we made this conscious decision not to go anymore because we thought, well, it's just these particular group of people. We couldn't relate it to the transgender issue. We thought, they just, for whatever reason, haven't figured life out. We just know how to do this. We can go and sort of separate life from our transgender identity, because I really didn't want to be transgender. I really wanted to be a man. And I really wanted to erase the existence of Laura, so we weren't interested in being transgender in that sense. We really wanted to be the opposite gender. So we sort of secluded ourselves and began living that way, and I was really happy for a couple of years. And in 2009, I went to San Francisco and had an outpatient double mastectomy. I thought it was going to be the greatest experience of my life. That was sort of the pinnacle of life.
On the day of her surgery, when we knew it was happening, one of our other couple friends had us out to their home, kept us all day, fed us, we read scripture, we prayed, and they loved on us all day because they knew what was going on in our lives. That was a very hard day.
I remember I was laying there on the operating table, and I was staring down at my chest, and I could see these cut lines in purple marker all over my chest that he was about to, it looked like something out of a horror movie, and I was so scared. I really was afraid I wouldn't wake up, and was all of a sudden very terrified. And as I was wrestling with this, and I was like, I should just run, I shouldn't do this, I just cried out to God. I hadn't wanted anything to do with God for years, and I hadn't prayed in a very long time. But I cried out to God, and I said, God, please spare my life. And God honored that prayer. They didn't know that was the first time I'd prayed in years. And for anyone that's going to consider going through it, I still wish that I hadn't gone through with the surgery. God was faithful and preserved my life, but I knew it was wrong, and I regret it. I still don't have breasts. I never will. When I came back, the boss that I had at the time was a lesbian, and she was very supportive of all things LGBT. She thought this was going to be wonderful for me, and she said, I don't know what's wrong with you, but you're not working as hard, you're unmotivated, and you're moping around here. She said, I want the old Jake back. And I was stunned by that. I didn't know what she meant. I mean, I had had all the legal changes. I had legally changed my name. I was now, because of my surgery, I was legally male, and I thought I had everything I ever wanted. I was really mad at first, but after a while I started thinking about it, like, what is she seeing in me? Why am I so depressed? And I had to admit that my surgery hadn't made me a man. That was a very, very difficult time in my life. So a lot of people will ask, why is the suicide rates so high in transgenders? Because a lot of the LGBT community, a lot of times in the media, will say, well, it's because they're not being affirmed, they're not being accepted. When I was first doing this, I didn't care whether people affirmed me or not. I was so happy doing this, and they'll always tell you, one day you'll be passing and no one's gonna know, one day you're only gonna be known as Jake, and no one's gonna know the difference. And so I always had that to hang on to. And so it really didn't get me depressed. Maybe a little, and I would get angry with people, but the true depression came after surgery. That was a huge blow to me because I thought that would bring me true happiness and true contentment. But when I realized that my surgery hadn't made me a man, and I had just maimed my body and made this major change, and it wasn't even so much at that point, I don't even know that I regretted it, because I liked the results. I physically liked the results. but it was more the fact that I was crushed to realize that I wasn't a man. And then about a year later or so, I ended up having all female organs removed. I thought, well, maybe that'll help. Maybe another month of hormones. There was always this elusive happiness out there that it was always like I was going to be happy one day, but I never quite got there. I was getting so frustrated with the prosthetics I was using, and I was sick of it. The reality really hit me. You know, if this was surgically attached to my body, even if it was a part of, like, they use your arm muscle for one of the surgeries, I thought, even if this was part of my own body, there is something so much deeper in me that is not a man, and it's something I can't put my finger on. It's not something tangible. I remember standing in a group of guys outside one time, and I had always been comfortable around guys when I was a girl, but all of a sudden they only know me as a guy, and it was a totally different dynamic. There's something I can't put my finger on, but there's a difference here. I am not like them. I'm not wired that way. I'm not the same. But after a while, I began to really feel imprisoned by all the fakeness of everything, just dealing with the prosthetics I was using and the clothes that never fit, and trying to cover my lies was awful. Now that I was in a situation where I was only known as male, all of a sudden I have, you know, almost 30 years of history that I have to rewrite. You know, Scouts couldn't be Girl Scouts. It had to be, you know, Boy Scouts. It was baseball instead of softball, and I had to think on the fly, and there were several times that I would accidentally say something, and it was like, oh man, how am I gonna cover this up? And I was lying to people that I really cared about and loved. And so what was promised to be freedom had become my prison cell.
There was not a whole lot of communication initially. My husband and I both were becoming more involved in Bible study and so forth. He was changing both of us. We just tried to live the life before her, the life that we had found. I never called her by her desired name, ever, because that's not who she is. That's not who she was. That's not who God created. And so I would just, you know, and I never said he and she much. I just called her honey.
My mom just refused to call me Jake, and it made me so mad at the time. And I said, you have got to accept this. This is who I am, and you're just gonna have to get over it, and you need to use male pronouns and all this. And she never would. And it just drove me up the wall. Everybody else was calling me Jake. Everybody else I knew, I was only known as Jake at work, by my partner, by my friends. And that kept me tethered to that reality that that's who I was. And I was constantly reminded I was their daughter and not their son.
Then she began calling. My husband had to go to the doctor in Tulsa about once a week. And every time he would go, he would meet with her for lunch. He was talking to her about prophecy and stuff he was learning. Well, my Bible study was growing to the point that they wanted me to begin recording and make the lessons available online, and Laura has background to be able to do that. So I called her one day and I said, would you like to do the website, build it, create it, and maintain it?
I really wasn't even motivated by helping her. I really needed the money and the experience, but I thought this would be a nice part of the website. So as I'm trying to read her notes to make a summary for each lesson, all of a sudden, I'm seeing love in the Bible for the first time in my life and seeing God's faithfulness. And I'm just blown away by the things that she's learned. And I started thinking over the last few months, I said, Mom, you have really changed. What's going on? And so she talked to me about how she had really surrendered her life to Christ, and now she didn't just have a Christian religion, but she had true faith, and she was being changed by the Holy Spirit, and she was surrendered to Him, and He was changing her. And it was at that moment that I knew the gospel was true. I knew that it wasn't just true intellectually, it wasn't just true stories, but it really was the truth. And I knew that Christ was alive. I had seen His transforming power in my mom, and I knew if He could change my mom from somebody who was all about legalism and rules into somebody that was loving and filled with faith, I knew it was real. So that night I went home and I prayed, just repented of my sins, but I had trouble believing that God would forgive me. I had spit in God's face. I had denied Him to so many people, and I'd spent so many years running from Him, and I'd completely changed my entire identity in my body, and I just felt like used goods. And so I I prayed and I said, Lord, I want to be used by you again. I want to serve you, but I don't know. Is there still hope for me? Can you still use someone like me? And after that, I just felt totally transformed in this. I felt like light was bursting forth from me, and I knew I was completely changed. And I really began to grow in my faith. I was so hungry for the Word. I started listening to my audio Bible all day long at work. I would listen to either that or Bible teaching of some kind of Bible study. The Lord began to convict me little by little. He didn't leave me there, in being transgender, and slowly the conviction started to come. As I'm sitting there thinking about it one night, the Lord very clearly said, if you stood before me tonight, what name would I call? And I was very stunned by that, because I thought, I just had convinced myself that God would accept me as Jake, and I had pictured myself showing up in heaven as a boy. And I didn't really answer at first, but I knew that he was not going to call me Jake. God said, let me tell you who you are. And it was the most loving voice I've ever heard in my life. The creator of all the universe had said, let me tell you who you are, because my identity is not something for me to go search out. We hear in culture all the time, we need to find ourselves. We need to go find our identity. We are already defined. We are known before the foundations of the world. But as I began to pray, I began to tell the Lord that I was willing, but I didn't know how. And I remember thinking, God, I have destroyed my body. I've had chest surgery. I've taken all these hormones, and I don't know that I'll ever look like a girl again. But I know I can't keep living this way. And so for about a month, I begged God to take my life. I just cried out to God every night. And for about a month, God sort of left me there. And it wasn't like I knew God hadn't abandoned me, but I think God just gave me some time to wrestle and really get desperate. And I said, God, I'm willing, whatever it takes. I don't care what it takes. I'm willing to walk out of this. But I felt like I'd fallen in this deep, dark pit that I didn't know how to get out of.
So one Sunday afternoon, I got home from church and there was an email. And she said, Mom, I have decided that I cannot live this way any longer. And I didn't hear from her for 36 hours. I didn't know what that meant. She wouldn't answer my phone call, she wouldn't answer my text. And so I was a little bit, because it almost sounded like, I'm at the end of this, I can't do this anymore.
One night, as I was calling out to the Lord, I had a clear vision of Jesus Christ getting down on one knee. He reached his hand into the pit and he said, do you trust me? And as I thought about it for a second, I knew he was asking me to leave everything. And I said, I do. And so I took his hand and walked away from my entire life. I left my partner, I left my job, I left my security, my entire identity behind. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done. I came home and my mom kept telling me, if you will be obedient to God, the feelings will follow, but you've got to put your faith in the Lord and walk by faith. As I was unpacking the little bit of clothes I had, I'd given away almost everything, but I would sort of unpack one thing at a time and I would just sob for an hour. It was so devastating. Think about everything I'd left. I just thought, I can't handle this anymore. And the pain is just becoming too great. My mom all of a sudden brought this entire pile of cards out and set them on the table that the ladies in her Bible study had written to me. And she told me how they'd been praying for me for years and they were so excited to meet me. And as I began to open these cards, they weren't just, sign their name. These ladies had written me real notes telling me about the hope that they had for their own prodigal children and how they loved and encouraged me and how they were praying for me. And I just felt so loved by these women. And then on top of that, they had raised almost $1,600 for me to buy a new wardrobe. I said, Mom, I don't even know these women. And I was just overcome by their love for me. One of the cards in particular is I was really struggling with, I can't handle the pain. It says, help me to honor thee by believing before I feel, for great is the sin if I make feeling a cause of faith. That was exactly what I need to hear, that it was a great sin for me to make my feelings a cause of faith. My faith was in Christ, not in what I was feeling. If we were just made up of our feelings and our instincts and our desires, that would just make us like animals. We would be slaves to our desires. But because we're made in the image of God, we can choose our behavior no matter what we feel. And that was really radical to me. For anyone out there that is struggling, that's thinking, this is too painful, this is too hard, I've been there and I know what that's like. But the next morning when I showed up at Mom's Bible study, all of a sudden I was surrounded by more love than I've ever felt in my life from women. And they just surrounded me with hugs and with joy. I've never seen so much joy at a sinner repenting and coming home, and they were just flooding me with love and compassion. And they were so happy for me. And in that moment, my heart was transformed. And all of a sudden, I no longer believed that I was transgender. It still took a while for God to peel away the layers. I didn't really like being a female at that moment, but I knew that I was going to be okay. I knew that God was with me, and I knew that I had an incredible support network. So a couple of days later, we started buying female clothes, and I was excited and ready to embark on this new life.
And I mean, she was drawn to things with lace. She was buying jewelry, and I look back now, and she's become pretty feminine. It's a transformation that has been external as well as internal.
And over the next couple of years, as God began to peel away the layers, began to heal the wounds and the hurt, and help me to forgive everything, and to really wrestle with the lies that I had believed as a child. My mom really did love me, but I just couldn't understand it. Not only did he heal our relationship, he used her to bring me to Christ. When people get tired of the lies, they don't turn to the people that lie to them. They turn to the people that told them the truth even when they didn't want to hear it. I had named myself Jacob, but I didn't realize until God revealed it much later that Jacob meant supplanter and deceiver. And that's exactly, Jacob had been nothing but supplanting my true identity and had been just a life of lies. But then later, once I went back to being Laura, I didn't know that Laura meant victorious spirit.